Rosemary, I need permission to record.
Okay, Elaine.
Ready?
Yes.
Good evening. Welcome to the League of Women Voters Candidate Forum for the 58th Representative District in the Illinois General Assembly. Candidates are Republican Mike Clark and Democrat Bob Morgan. My name is Elaine Adler, a member of the leadership team of the Highland Park-Highwood League of Women Voters. I am presenting the sponsors, and I'm representing the sponsors of this forum, the League of Deerfield-Lincolnshire, Highland Park-Highwood, Lake Forest-Lake Bluff, and Glencoe-Glenview. The League is a 102-year-old grassroots organization whose mission is to educate and empower voters. We are nonpartisan. We do not support or oppose candidates. This evening, we are happy to provide a Spanish interpreter. So if you want to hear this in Spanish, push the globe that says interpreter. It's on your screen.
So, si quieren escuchar esto en español, tienen que escuchar el globo que dice intérprete que está en su pantalla.
In keeping with league policy, our moderator is a league member who does not vote in the 58th Street District. And I'd like to introduce Lolly Watt. Lolly Watt has been a league member for almost 20 years and served in many positions, including president of her local league board and on the LWV US National Board. She has also served as an elected official and therefore has a deep appreciation of the importance of candidate forums. As I said, league policy and practice is that the moderator may not live in the district covered in the forum. Lolly was a longtime resident of Wilmette and moved to Chicago a couple of years ago. And our leagues are grateful to Lolly for moderating this important voting event. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Lolly Watt, and our two candidates are Mike Clark and Bob Morgan. The candidates have signed an agreement about the format, the time limits, ground rules of this forum. We are very grateful to them for participating in this forum because this goes to the core of what we do as the League of Women Voters. We want to provide opportunities to you, the voters, to hear directly from the candidates, learn what they think, what they believe, and make up your own minds about who you want to vote for. I'm grateful to the candidates for running. I'm grateful to the voters who are here this evening. And I urge you as voters to let your friends and family know that a recording of this forum will be available both on the league websites and in the social media streams of the sponsoring leagues who you heard about. We are going to start this forum with opening statements in the order of ballot position. We are going to then go through a series of questions, which the candidates will have an opportunity to respond to. And then we will do closing statements in reverse order. The opening statements will be 2 minutes each, and the responses and closing statements will be 1.5 minutes each. I ask the candidates to please address their responses to me rather than to each other. Please take the entirety of your time if you would like to. If you do not want to take the entirety of the time, that's fine also, but you do not get to carry over that time to other responses. The questions were submitted in advance by people who are voters in your district. They have been edited by the organizers of the forum for duplications and to make sure that they actually apply to the 58th Illinois Representative District. So they are things that you would be able to impact. We're going to try and get through as many questions as we can, but I can't guarantee we're going to get through all of them. We, in fact, know we can't get through all of them because we received many more questions than we have time for. The candidates will be timed, and you can see on your screen an official timer. They will let you know when you have 1 minute left, when you have 30 seconds left, and 15 seconds left, and when you're out of time. I would really appreciate it if you would stop talking when the time's up comes up, because that helps us stay on time. This is not a forum, not a debate. So again, please do not be addressing each other. Be accurate about the facts, but the League of Women Voters is not fact checking your responses. That is up to the voters, the public, and the press to fact check any numbers or things that you say. Speak to your own views rather than commenting on your opponent's views. As you all know, this is being recorded. The League of Women Voters retains the copyright ownership of the recording and transcript, and no one may use either without express written approval from the League of Women Voters. Any approval we give will be for the audio and video to be used unedited and in their entirety. The only exception is media reporting. Do not have to use the entire audio, obviously. With that, we are going to start the opening statement. The first statement will be by you, Mr. Clark. So with the timers, if you are ready, let's start with your opening statement.
Well, Lally, thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it. My name is Mike Clark. I'm a Lake Bluff resident, a parent, and I work in the private sector as a construction manager in Chicago. The reason I got involved in this race is I was concerned and angry with the direction of our state, specifically 4 areas: schools, crime, taxes, and mandates. In schools, the Democrats implemented crushing mandates on our innocent children. The rapidly, poorly thought out closures and remote learning really had dire consequences and unintended repercussions. They canceled healthy outlets like sports and parks. They forced quarantines, testings, and social distancing. They mandated masks and pushed unproven vaccines. All of this on a healthy, low-risk population. On crime, they ignored the mob, riots, and damage to our cities. They passed a sweeping 700-page crime bill in the middle of the night on the last day of the session with limited input from the public or law enforcement. They also passed a bill to allow larger amounts of possession of deadly fentanyl as a misdemeanor. Under taxes, Illinois has one of the highest tax burdens in the country. We've all watched and read about corporations leaving our state. They also have the highest number of governmental units. We pay for 7,000 governmental units in Illinois. That's higher than any state in the country. We have the second highest property tax rate. On mandates, we have an unchecked governor who just passed his 33rd or 34th consecutive emergency order on COVID with no input from the public or the legislature. Whoop, time's up.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Morgan, you have 2 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Lally. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Morgan. I'm currently have the privilege of serving as a state representative for the 58th district. I live here in Deerfield with my wife and 2 children, and have really been honored with the opportunity to serve this community for the last 4 years. So thank you to the League for hosting this tonight. It is a really tremendous opportunity for us to share our ideas for the future. When I joined the legislature just 4 years ago, Illinois was in a bad spot. We had a really difficult time under the previous administration, where we had racked up billions of dollars in debt. We had underfunded and defunded human services and education. And we came in and in the last 4 years, every single year we've passed a balanced budget. Every year we have put our minimum pension requirement in, but in fact, this last year we put more to reduce our pension debt. We have passed world-leading clean energy legislation. We put more money into schools, more money into education, and more money into law enforcement across the board, across the state. So we've taken those steps necessary to move us forward. But when I knock on doors, when I talk to our constituents, the thing I hear most is about the fear of losing their freedom. And that fear and that freedom takes many forms. In particular, the fear of losing the right to choose reproductive health, the right to choose their own health decisions between them and their doctors. Freedom and fear of losing the freedom of being able to march in a 4th of July parade without fear of being struck by a mass shooting or assault weapon. The freedom to love who they love and support the LGBTQ community, freedom to attend the schools that they want to. So we have a tremendous district, very, very fortunate and humbled to be able to represent you. And I ask for your support moving forward. Look forward to the forum.
Thank you very much. We are now going to move into the question and answer section. We're going to start with Mr. Morgan, then Mr. Clark on question 1, and then I'm going to reverse that order for each succeeding question. I am going to read the question once for both of you. Obviously, if you don't remember the question I asked, you can ask me and I will repeat it, but we find it saves a lot of time if I don't have to reread the question for the second person who's answering. So with that, we will get started. Mr. Morgan, you go first. Choose a single issue you would prioritize in the coming term and describe what should be accomplished in your view.
Thank you, Lally. This coming term, my priority, in fact, the next time we return to Springfield, will be on reducing gun violence. What we went through in Highland Park in the 4th of July parade completely transformed this community and transformed our focus on what we need to do to keep our community safe. Since that day, I have been meeting with stakeholders across the state and prioritizing now as chair of the Firearms Safety and Reform Working Group in the House. My job is to pass legislation that is going to reduce gun violence in Illinois. So when I return to Springfield, that is the most consequential bill that I think I can help pass and shepherd through our state legislation so that we reduce gun violence, not just in Highland Park, but in parts throughout the state of Illinois. It's long overdue. And I frankly feel like this community is urging us to do it as quickly as possible. Gun violence should afflict no community the way it has afflicted Highland Park.
Thank you. And now Mr. Clark on the same question.
Well, the single issue that's come up in my discussions with the district is crime, but not gun control, but more the Safety Act, which the Democrats passed in the middle of the night to allow cashless bail for a number of crimes. People are concerned about the crimes that will now be not considered for cash bail. So I support the view of keeping our community safe, but the number one issue that I'm hearing is the Safety Act, which will not keep the community safe. So I would work with all of the representatives to modify or repeal that act. Thank you.
Okay, the second question, we're going to start with you, Mr. Clark, and then move to Mr. Morgan. The second question is, do you think assault weapons and high-capacity magazines should be banned? Why or why not? And Mr. Clark, you have a minute and a half on that.
Well, I support the end goal, which is to end gun violence. I don't support some of the ways that they're trying to do it with an assault ban. I'm not sure, based on what I've seen and read, that would stop anything. You still have people that are breaking laws by killing people. And according to the FBI, most mass shooting is done with a handgun. So I'm not sure, and Highland Park already has an assault ban, and they had a terrible tragedy on 4th of July. So no, I do not support an assault gun ban, but I do support looking at how we can reduce gun violence and mass shootings. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Now you, Mr. Morgan, on the same question.
I strongly support an assault weapon ban and a high capacity magazine ban. The reason is we as a country are no different than any other country in terms of incidents of mental illness or any other criminal proclivities. What we are different in is our gun violence and our gun deaths. We're exponentially increase the likelihood of gun violence in our community, in our state, in our country, because of the number of guns that we have. We have millions of guns in the state of Illinois for a state of 13 million people. The idea that these weapons of war are in our community and the deaths that our community experienced on the 4th of July would have been reduced, would have been a smaller number of victims had there been a handgun instead of a semi-automatic weapon that was able to shoot 83 bullets in less than a minute. The idea that we can't do anything to reduce gun violence is just burying our heads in the sand. I reject the idea that we can't keep our community safe, and there are so many things that we can do, starting with banning assault weapons and banning high-capacity magazine bans.
Thank you. For the third question, we actually stick with gun violence. Obviously, it is high in the minds of people in the district. We're going to start with you, Mr. Morgan. Please be as specific as you can, both of you. What methods to lessen or prevent gun violence would you support?
Well, with this working group, we have a large number of ideas that we are looking at. So we already mentioned the banning of assault weapons, removing high-capacity magazines that have 30 bullets or more. Some of these magazines, which are allowing really significant mass violence. So those are just the start. In addition, we are allowing 18-year-olds who can't drink alcohol. We're giving them access to an AR-15. We are allowing individuals who should have weapons removed from their home because they have domestic violence situations, and they're not giving up their guns. So we have a number of things that we can do to keep our community safe. We have to look at the ways in which people have access to these firearms right now. At this exact moment, you can buy, there's a gun show loophole. We closed it starting in 2024, but it's not soon enough. We have to move up universal background checks to make sure people who shouldn't and don't belong having weapons don't have weapons so they can harm people. I mean, these are really basic concepts that unfortunately have become so difficult for politicians to wrap their heads around. Again, they're burying their heads in the sand and they're rejecting the things that we need to do to keep our community safe.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, the same question.
Well, for me, the focus is on the individual. I mean, it's an old saying, but the gun doesn't kill anyone. It's the individual. We have strict gun laws in Illinois. We have background checks. We have a FOID. We have red flag laws. So we have laws in place. It's not the laws. It's not the gun. It's the person. And if a criminal wants to commit a crime, it doesn't matter how many laws you put on the books. So I would look at addressing how we can enforce the laws. One of them, of course, would be to repeal the Safety Act so that repeat offenders are not out on the streets. But again, I would focus on the mental health issues, the drug issues, depression, suicide, all of these. Illinois has strong gun laws. So adding another strong gun law, I don't know that that helps anything. So I would focus on enforcing the laws that we already have on the books and working with the law enforcement community on those red flag issues that were in place at Highland Park and in Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you. For the next question, we're going to start with you, Mr. Clark. And this question is, how would you explain the cash bail portion of the Safety Act to voters? So if you're talking to them about the Safety Act, how would you explain the cash bail section of that act?
Okay, well, I've read it a couple times and it contains quite a bit, but my understanding on the Cash Bail Act is that right now, judges have three options. They can put in a cash bail assigned. They can put in a recognizance, or they can reduce and let the criminal out on his own recognition. But the Safety Act will now remove a number of crimes that will not require cash bail, that the prosecution will have to make a case to the judge rather than the judge have that discretion. So cash bail has now become more helpful to the criminal and the crime than it does to the law. And you can just see that 100 out of 102 states' attorneys opposed this bill because of the Cash Bail Act. The two that didn't were Cook County and Lake County. Thank
Okay,
you.
you have time, you're done. Okay, thank you. Mr. Morgan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that answer just reflects total garbage that we've heard throughout the state. I mean, we're talking about right now, as our Lake County State's Attorney talked about, put out a press release, we had a rapist that bought his way out of jail because we have cash bail. The very premise, that alone, that simple case should be enough for all of us to look and reflect on, maybe we have a different system. Maybe there's something that we should do where somebody who's actually a risk to society should be kept in jail as opposed to somebody who doesn't have enough money. What my opponent might not know is that over 97% of the Lake County jail right now is filled with individuals who are pre-trial. They're pre-trial because they can't afford to buy their way out of jail. That is not the society that we should have. Those are not standards we should be living by. So the idea that somehow our streets are going to be flooded with criminals, they're flooded with criminals right now who are buying their way out of jail. We need to change that so that people who are real risks to society are kept in jail and kept our communities safe. So Safety Act is going to do that. And that's why our Lake County State's Attorney and other state's attorneys see that this is a good thing.
Okay, I'll remind you to please not comment on what your opponents say and just address me with your own views. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next question, starting with you, Mr. Morgan. And that question is, it's a different topic. What should Illinois lawmakers do about unfunded pension liabilities?
That's a great question, a hugely important question, because what we're doing with our pensions and our pension payments every year are crowding out a lot of the other things that we would like to do with our budget. So it's a very, very significant burden on our annual budget, which is why I've been focused over the last 4 years of reducing our pension debt. It was my idea and my concept and my legislation this year that helped reduce our pension debt by $3 billion. That's reduced our annual budget and our annual costs over the last 3 years by $500 million. So $500 million more in our budget. And that's more money back in our pockets. It's more money into education, more money into healthcare. That's the difference with our pension debt. So our unfunded liability, this is the first year where 50% of our retirees are going to be in tier 2. With tier 2, it's a much lower benefit, less generous benefit. Our COLA is fixed. So as people with tier 2 pensions start to retire, our pension liability is going to start going down. That starts this year. So we're going to see that in coming years, but there's so much more we need to do. And I look forward to working on all of those issues because it's freeing up that money and those resources to protect our pensions, but put money into where the state needs it most.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, same question.
Well, as I understand it, it's written into our Constitution, so we can't change those tier 1 pensions. We've tried over a number of years. Illinois is one of the few states that have it locked in on a constitutional amendment. So I do understand that the tier 2 group is costing us less. But as far as what we can do with the unfunded pensions for the tier 1, I do not know because it is locked in and the judges have ruled you can't change their pensions. And I know that it right now, I believe, is over $9 billion a year. So it's a difficult situation. And I don't have a good answer on how you would change for tier 1. It is true that the tier 2 group is moving and getting bigger, and that will help. And that then we can focus more money on some of the other issues.
Thank you. We are going to start with you, Mr. Clark, on the next question, which is, do you think any ethics reforms are needed for the state of Illinois? And if so, what ethics reforms would you be a proponent of and why?
Well, ethics in all governments are always worthwhile for review. I would support term limits, including myself, so that is part of the problem. We have career politicians. And so as far as ethics goes, I would hope that we could have more transparency on the spending, on the budgets to see where the money's going. But on specific ethics reforms, I guess I would just push for term limits. Thank you.
Sorry, are you done?
Yes,
It started cutting out on me a little bit. I'm sorry. Okay, Mr. Morgan, on the same question.
Thank you, Lally. One of the best things that we have done is we've changed leadership in the Illinois House of Representatives. I led the way to change our Illinois House Speaker. It was time for Speaker Madigan to go, and it was really, amongst other things, it was really holding us back from passing significant, meaningful ethics reform. We've taken some steps on that, but frankly, we have so much more to do. I would be a strong proponent, for instance, of putting a total ban on legislators becoming lobbyists. I think it's wrong. I think there are a lot of ways to serve, but I think the idea of being a revolving door from a legislator straight into a lobbyist, I don't think it's the right way to go, and it'd be something that I would support in legislation and have supported. Beyond that, again, there are a lot of things that we should be doing with disclosure. We have seen a number of individuals who've exploited the systems that we have. I think we have to continue to do better to make sure that people who are unscrupulous legislators or elected officials who try and game the system and benefit themselves have no business anywhere near government. And we have to do a lot better at that. Illinois has a horrible history on that. We've taken some steps, but I want to continue to push this forward on ethics reform.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, we're going to start the next question with you, which is, how would you work to create better bipartisan collaboration? And why do you think that is important, if you think it's important?
I do think it's important. Over the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of energy building coalitions with, again, diverse number of legislators, including Republicans. The idea I mentioned earlier about the COLA buyout for pensions, which has reduced our pension debt by $3 billion, that was a bipartisan idea. That was an idea I had back in 2012 and 13, it's Democrat. And it was adopted by Mark Batnick, who's a Republican, who's retiring this year in the House. He took that idea, pushed it into law, and I worked with him this year to renew it and double the program to increase the savings we have in the state. So there are a lot of opportunities. The public doesn't know the vast majority of bills that we pass are unanimous, not just bipartisan, but unanimous. Because what's good for the state and for one part of the state is good for the whole state. So the vast majority of the things we do are bipartisan, but there are exemptions. There are exceptions to that. I think we've seen that on things like environmental legislation, which only had a few Republicans support it, even though it helps the entire state's environment. Things that reducing our pension debt, right? These are things that we can do in a bipartisan way. And increasingly, we're seeing partisan actors who don't come to state legislature to govern or to work. They come because they want to break the system. So I think bipartisanship is important, but not for the sake of destroying the system.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Same question.
well, obviously for Republicans, it's critical. We're in the minority. So with 118 representatives, you're not going to get anything done to the governor's desk without getting some Democrats involved, especially as a new person, especially as a non-politician. Yeah, I would have to probably work twice as hard as my opponent to try and get some Democrats to join me in some of our conservative ideas and reach out to the conservative wing. Because obviously my ideas that I would bring forth would be conservative. And I would need the help of not only my Republicans, but some Democrats. So it'll be a lesson learned for me, and I will have to learn quickly and reach out to all 118 and hope that I can get 60.
Okay, thank you. Next question, we start with you, Mr. Clark. Which issues regarding our water supply do you feel are the most urgent right now? And what proposals do you have for addressing them?
Our water supply, could you be more specific on?
I'm sorry, I'm just reading the question submitted by voters. I don't have clarification on that.
I guess I'm not clear on what that question means. I mean, we're fortunate geography to have Lake Michigan, and we have, I think, a solid protection plan, and I agree with my opponent on environmental conditions. So I would be all for looking at pollution, but I really don't understand the question. So I'm not sure what the problem is with the water supply. At least in Illinois, I know that obviously the rest of the country is facing a critical drought, especially in the West. So I guess I would ask for further clarification on what that means.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, on the same question?
We have an extensive amount of sewer lines that are lead laced in the suburbs in our district. Lead pipes in and of themselves are not as harmful as it might sound. It's more of lead pipes in the home that are problematic because it's usually treated along the way in our sewer systems. But these are real issues and there's a real cost to our communities. We can talk about requiring replacement of lead pipes, but we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's a significant investment that we have to balance with public safety. The other thing with regards to our water supply is flooding. It's something that affects so many of us, and as it's raining right now, there are those in our district who really can't sleep at night when it's raining because of fear of flooding. That impacts our water supply and our water system. We have secured $120 million from the state of Illinois state budget just for Lake County to address flooding. I was proud to lead on that issue. It's one that, again, affects, doesn't matter your political persuasion or where you live. If your house floods, your community floods, it can destroy your home and your livelihood. So we've taken some great steps on that, and I look forward to continuing to push forward on our water supplies.
Thank you. We start with you, Mr. Morgan, on the next one. Do you support the creation of an independent redistricting commission for our state? If so, how should it be accomplished? If not, why not?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think we can always do better with our redistricting. I think we can start and agree there. That being said, I look at what we just accomplished with our redistricting. For one thing, our district largely stays the same. I appreciate that because that reflects really a concentration of our district where we're not splitting up communities. We're not dividing Deerfield or Lake Forest or Lake Bluff in half. We have holistic boundaries. So I appreciate that. But a lot of other parts of the state are really struggling with other things with redistricting, not just because of population laws, but representation. And by representation, I mean, we have passed in the 2020 redistricting, the most reflective, diverse districting in the history of the state of Illinois, where our district's socioeconomic diversity, racial diversity, religious diversity, we've created a map for the state of Illinois where it will be more reflective of our residents. So I think we've taken some good strides. I do think an independent redistricting commission usually does not take into account racial minority status. So I'd be concerned about that because ultimately our racial representation. It's easy to look at that one district in the south side of Chicago and say it's gerrymandered, but it's a Latino representative district. And without Latino representation, we don't have representative government in Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Same question.
Yeah, I would definitely support an independent commission. I mean, I've looked at some of these boundaries, and yes, the 58th is pretty clean, but we still have these tiny slices of Glencoe and Northbrook. And if you look at the districts in Chicago, I mean, they look like some kind of bacteria slides. I don't know, who's in charge of all of that gerrymandering, but there are states that I think do it right. I look at Iowa, that I know they have a different proportion of population, but I think our boundaries are crazy, and I would definitely support. How would I go about it? I guess I would talk to the other states because I don't exactly know. I'm not that smart. I would ask some of the better states that have done it, but I would definitely give it to an independent commission. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to start with you, Mr. Clark, on the next one. If elected, how would you keep your constituents informed about your actions in Springfield?
Well, being new to this, I'm not a politician, but I would assume town halls are some of the best ways to engage your constituents, and using some of the social media, which I'm not good at, but hopefully I could hire someone. But yeah, I would hold regular meetings, both Zoom, Facebook, and face-to-face town hall meetings. And I've been trying to do that. I've been reaching out to a lot of the groups right now, but this is all new to me, so I'm going to learn as I go along. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Morgan, same question.
We can always do better, and I can always do better communicating with our constituents. Again, there are 108,000 people who live in this district with a wide array of ideas and perspectives and things that they're going through and needs that they have from government, things they want to see from their elected representative. So I've always focused on social media, emails, knocking doors, town halls, public forums, but there's so much more that we could do. People are increasingly only getting information from their Facebook doom scrolling, right? So they're only getting their own bubble of information, and it's reinforcing everyone's own perceived biases and issues that they already had, and their beliefs and values as being reinforced because they're only getting their information from their own friends on social media. So we have to reflect that. We have to look at government in the way that it's reflecting information. When government does something good, when government does something bad, they need to make sure that information is getting to people where they are. So I would increase the access to social media, increase mail, because there are plenty of people still not on social media, and making sure we're also getting to young people in schools, high school students who are soon going to be voting, need to understand what government's doing and not doing for them. So there's a lot more we can do.
Thank you. Next question, we start with you, Mr. Morgan. In your opinion, how should a representative balance their personal beliefs with public opinion in their district?
That's a very good question. And I'm fortunate, frankly, where I represent a district that has been very, very clear about their positions. When the district reached out to me following the George Floyd killing, it was very clear across all corners of our district that they wanted to see police accountability reform. During COVID, it was almost unanimous from the people that were reaching out to my district office. They wanted to keep people safe and follow the science. They wanted to support their teachers. They wanted to support nurses and frontline workers. They wanted to support the employees that are the front lines at our grocery stores. So my role is really to be a sponge of what the district wants. We do vote on hundreds of different things every year. So you can't really start poll testing every single issue, but you can make it clear where your positions are. There are things that sometimes people in my district disagree with me on, and that's okay. But I have to communicate that and vice versa. The district will let us know when we're doing a good job and when we're not. It really is a balance. There are times where there's a conflict of something I might feel really strongly about, and the district disagrees, and you have to respect that. I have to respect that. That's why it's representative government, and that's when it works. The government will reflect that.
Mr. Clark, same question for you.
Yeah, that's a difficult one for someone like me, new, and I see it as presenting my positions, my values, my policies, and if people agree with me, they'll vote. Now, obviously, that's not 100%, and that's not black and white, but I don't see trying to go the other way of finding out what the district wants and then voting for it. Otherwise, you don't really need anybody other than, I don't know, a computer for your vote. So I'm going to lay out exactly my positions on as many issues as I can. And if people agree, they'll vote. And if they won't agree, they won't vote. But I'm sure with the number of issues and the changing issues that there will be times when I will not be sure, or I will take into account some of my district. So I'm going to lay out the differences I have with my opponent and the differences that I believe in. And hopefully I can convince or be the same as most of my voters. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, we start with you. What do you think of measures to preserve more acreage in open lands, such as, but not limited to, the former Route 53 corridor?
Yeah, well, coming from the private sector, I'm more of a private sector person, so I don't like to see the government reaching out on private property. But I do admit that, green space is a good thing. And, obviously we need the government to look at certain areas, and I'm not familiar with that specific one, Lally, but I would think that I could be open to that. I'm sorry, go ahead. So yeah, I would be open and I'd read the bill. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Same question.
Yeah, thanks, Lolly. It's one of the most amazing things about this district. The 58th district has the largest stretch of Lake Michigan. It has one of the highest per capita areas of preserves, of open lands. So our district, again, this is not a partisan issue. Our district cares deeply about the environment and about open lands and walkable lands and bike paths. And just really accessible pedestrian areas is really, really important to this district more than most. So I'm very proud that we've put more money just in this last budget. We increased our funding to open lands for the purpose of preserving some of our communities, some of our forest preserves. It's just vitally important. It's not just to enjoy on our leisure, which we do. It's because it impacts our community and our world moving forward for our children, literally preserving our forests so that our children will have that to enjoy, our grandchildren too. So it's again, really integral in our community, something I will continue to fight for. And I'm proud that it's one of the biggest things that I point to when I talk about nonpartisan issues in this district. Everyone agrees that the environment is so crucial to the life that we live here in the 58th district, that we need to preserve it at all costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, we start with you, Mr. Morgan. What do you think should be the role of the state of Illinois regarding infrastructure for electric vehicles in the state?
It's a great question. So infrastructure in the state of Illinois for electric vehicles is still in its nascent stages. We're still building it out. If you go to Target, you'll see an electric charging station increasingly at parking garages and malls. You see it. But the truth is we're increasing electric vehicles at a very, very fast clip. Our Tesla dealership right nearby in the district, we are a community that, again, per capita, probably has more electric vehicles than almost any in the state of Illinois. And that is a reflection of values. We are putting our money where our mouth is by showing that we care about the environment and are trying to reduce our use of fossil fuels. But in order to do that, we need more infrastructure. We've passed some legislation to put more money into charging stations. There's more legislation coming this spring that will do more on that and will create more guardrails around what parts of the state don't enjoy what we enjoy here, of just a real large number of electric vehicle charging stations. You can't buy a vehicle that can only go 200 miles if you are 150 miles from the nearest charging station. So we have to make sure our rural communities are really invested there. But we're making great strides, and I think we're definitely going to meet our goal of 1 million electric vehicles on the road in Illinois by 2030.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Same question.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of problems with the EV vehicles that are not talked about, including environmental issues. EV vehicles require batteries. Batteries have disposal issues and cost issues. Also, batteries require extensive minerals, cobalt, lithium, silver. All of these have to be mined, and some of these mines are not the most environmentally friendly. So I think we all have to learn a little bit more about these EV vehicles before we push ahead strongly. And I think environmentally, there is some more information that the public needs to know, especially about what we're doing right now with batteries. And batteries are extremely expensive. So I know we're not there yet on the technology. It can cost you $20,000 just to replace a battery on an EV vehicle. We saw in Florida some of the EV vehicles catching fire, and a lot of people couldn't get out. So there are still some problems. Not saying that we can't work them out, but I don't think we're there yet.
Thank you. Starting with you, Mr. Clark, what measures for school funding do you support and why?
Well, school funding is an interesting issue because we as a state have 851 school districts. Just as a comparison, Florida has about 70, and Florida has more of our population. And all of those districts require funding, labor, benefits, insurance, buildings. So we're feeding this 851 district beast. I would like to take a review, and I know they've done it in the past, on consolidating school districts. Because part of our problem is our property taxes. Most of our property taxes go to school funding. So I would be open to a review on how the funding is being used before we start aggressively looking at more funding. We certainly spend a lot on schools. Here in the district, we spend close to $28,000 a student. That's one of the highest in the country. So I think it's more important on how we're spending it first before we worry about more funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Same question.
I think the vast majority of the 58th district moved here because of our tremendous schools and our tremendous teachers. I know I did. When my children, now in kindergarten and second grade, they're receiving just extraordinary education, not just because they get a Chromebook here or there. It's because the teachers that come here are some of the best that we can find. And we're so fortunate. That being said, our state funding formula for schools is really archaic. And we took a very, very strong bipartisan step in 2017 to kind of start to re-regulate and restructure our funding for schools. And what does that mean? It means that in North Chicago, their school adequacy funding, meaning the 100% funding of what they should have in order to have basic education, they were close to 40%. Now, because of the evidence-based formula where we're putting more money specifically into the underfunded schools around the state, and that's not just North Chicago, it's Southern Illinois, it's all across the state, those schools that don't have the resources they need to succeed. We're starting to balance out our defunding of education that has happened for so many years. In fact, the Rauner years where we totally defunded higher education really significantly impacted our higher education, one of our biggest assets. So we're doing a much better job of putting the money and the resources into the schools that need it most. And it's just going to benefit everybody because the tide rises all boats. And we're going to continue to do that more and more so that the schools that don't have enough resources get.
Thank you. Your time's up. Thank you. Mr. Morgan, starting with you, do you think additional revenue, and I'm assuming this means in general, needs to be raised by the state? And if so, how? And if not, why not?
Generally speaking, I don't think that we need to be looking at raising more revenue. I think we have to be looking at being smarter about the revenue that we have. So we have been very fortunate that we restructured our funding, our tax base in Illinois so that we were capturing more of the taxes. Unlike a lot of other states, we did not tax sales. We were only taxing services. During the pandemic, that would have been very, very difficult for the state of Illinois. So we've changed our tax structure a little bit. But ultimately, we need to look at what we're spending our money on. We talked about pensions, and pension costs certainly are protected by the Constitution. But again, there are things that we've done and are doing to reduce that pension liability. It's still too much. And by having that high pension liability, where 20% of our budget every year is going to pensions, it limits what we can do with the rest of the money. So we have to make choices because a budget is nothing but a series of priorities and values. And those values in Illinois have historically included a lot of money for large corporate entities, tax credits, incentives, multi-billion-dollar companies, multinational companies getting hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue and tax deductions every year. Think Sears, how they went bankrupt after getting tens of millions of dollars in state revenue. So we need to be smarter with our revenue. We need to make sure that money is going to the places that need it most, because there are a lot of pockets in Illinois, parts of the state that have been left behind by our past budgets. And we're doing better, but there's so much more to do.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, same question.
Yeah, I would disagree. We need more funding. My understanding is we just had record number for fiscal year 22, almost $50 billion. And those corporate entities that are supposedly getting the money still aren't happy because they're leaving in droves. So I don't think it's a funding issue here in the state. I think it's a spending issue. So I would be more open to looking at everything that we're spending on and not worried about the funding, because when you talk to businesses, when you talk to individuals, one of the biggest problems in this state is our taxes. So we certainly don't want to be raising taxes or trying to finagle more money. I think we'll just chase more people and more businesses out of state. So I would agree that we have to look at our spending side and reduce our spending side so that there's not this constant need for additional revenue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think this next question is probably going to be our last so that we have time for closing statements. So we're going to start with you, Mr. Clark, on this last question. Would you support measures to alleviate the burden of inflation on Illinois residents? If so, how would you do that? And if not, why would you not do that? Mr. Clark.
Well, thank you. That's kind of a wide open question, inflation being more of a national issue, but we have taxes. We have some of the highest taxes on our gasoline. You know, the Democrats just raised it. They doubled it in 2019. So yes, I would look to alleviate some of the tax burdens on our middle class, which would be gasoline. We certainly could also look at the income tax hike that was put in 10 years ago. So I think the goal will be to reduce the burden for our middle class and lower class so that we can attract more people. And so I'm all for reducing taxes, whether it's because of inflation or whether it's just to protect our tax base and our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Same question.
There's no dispute that inflation is a national, in fact, a global phenomenon. We're not the only country or state, for that matter, dealing with inflation. It cuts across liberal and conservative states and countries, nations. So it really is a global supply chain that's been happening for decades. And so we have to take that seriously. And I think in Illinois, we have. We just put $1.8 billion in inflationary related tax relief back in people's pockets. Is it enough? Of course it's not. Are we still feeling it in gas tax? Are we feeling it at the grocery store? Yes. But we're doing what we can and we need to do more. I think this is a short-term spike in terms of inflation. We don't really know where our economy is going to go next. We obviously can only do so much about the global supply chain. But there are a lot of things that we can do in Illinois to make it easier for taxpayers. We talked about education funding. Biggest reason why our property taxes are so high is because for decades, state of Illinois sucked at funding schools. They didn't put enough money into it. And because they shortchanged our schools, the school districts had to raise their own property tax levies. So we're starting to see remediation of that, we're starting to fix that, but so much more needs to be done to reduce this burden on our middle class and lower socioeconomic families.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to do this to you, but I now realize we do have time for one more question, because both of you actually didn't use all of your time for some of them. So that's great for the voters in your district. We're going to have one last question before we move to closing statements. So we're going to start with you, Mr. Morgan. What is the responsibility of the state of Illinois to support mental health services for its residents?
It is a huge responsibility, and not just because government has an obligation to support those with behavioral health needs, but because Illinois created a big piece of this mental health problem. In the 2015, 16, 17 years, when we didn't have a state budget, one of the first areas in the state of Illinois to feel that were mental health providers, and they went away. These were years and decades in the making of creating businesses and a local community supports for mental health services, and they went away probably forever. So Illinois is rebuilding our mental health, and we have increased over the last 4 years our funding in mental health services. It is totally inadequate. Our mental health needs during the pandemic, our mental health needs before the pandemic, they are significant. We see it in the schools, we see it in our hospitals, we see it in our neighbors, we see it everywhere we go. So we have to take it seriously. We have to put resources into it. We need to encourage people to go into mental health fields. I'm proud to be married to a social worker who really dedicates her life to helping those who need it. And there are so many people who have really stepped up to help with mental health services. State of Illinois needs to do more, make sure we're putting our resources and funding into those, particularly those with severe mental illness, where we have defunded and underfunded those services for many, many years. And so I take it incredibly seriously. We've prioritized that in past budgets, and I promise you we will continue to do more moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Same question.
Well, I support the overall concept. I just question the way the government does it, the way the government spends it, and if there isn't any other opportunity to privatize some of the areas. So I would take mental health as well as many of the other programs and try and view what we've already done and what we're spending it on. So, because government programs have a tendency to grow with no accountability. So mental health is certainly a critical and important function of the state government. I would just like to know how it's being spent rather than just simply say, we need more money, we need more programs. So I would, as a business person, I would like to view and see what we can reform, what we can review, what we can outsource. What are we accomplishing? And then do that every year so that we can see if we're actually accomplishing our goals. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we will move to the closing statements. As I said at the top of this forum, we're going to do the closing statements in reverse order to the opening statements. And you will each have 1.5 minutes to talk directly to the voters and tell them what's on your mind. And we're going to start with you, Mr. Morgan. Your closing statement, please.
Thank you, Lally. And again, thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting. It has been and continues to be the honor of my life to represent this district at a time where our needs are so incredibly great, at a time where the world is so uncertain. After what we went through this summer in our community, to be taking and harnessing the need and the drive and the unity that came out of the events of the 4th of July shooting to try and improve the lives and improve our safety statewide, it's something that I take incredibly seriously and look forward to and really hope that I'll earn your vote to be able to move forward and create a more safe community so our children aren't in fear of a school shooting, so we can march in a parade and know that we are safe. There's so much more that we need to do to protect our freedoms, to protect our reproductive health. So I ask for your support. It has been an incredibly humbling experience being your state representative, and I promise you're going to see even more from me in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. You have 1.5 minutes for your closing statement.
Well, thanks, Lally, and thanks, Bob. I'm not a politician. I'm a private sector guy, but the Democrats have been in charge of the state for 4 years. They've been in charge of our own district for 30 years. What have they done? Well, they passed laws in the middle of the night to remove cash bail and protect criminals. They required our 4-year-olds to learn sex ed. They forced all schools to install tampons in the boys' bathroom. They threatened businesses during COVID for doing business. They destroyed high school athletes and their scholarships. They've removed parents' oversight of their minor children's major medical surgeries. They locked down churches, synagogues, small businesses, and beaches. They prevented us from visiting our sick and ailing family members in hospitals. They've supported and mandated CRT and race-based lessons to our young children. They've steamrolled personal freedoms, speech, and disagreements. They've ignored science on natural immunity, therapeutics, and adverse reactions. They've stood by teachers' unions over parents in school policy. And they've helped drug dealers by reducing penalties for possession and distribution. So if you're happy with what they've done, vote for them. If you want to change, I'm asking for your help in changing what they've done, and I'm asking for your vote in November. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We have come to the end of the question and answer portion and the closing statements from our candidates. I do want to once again remind you, voters, that the entire forum has been recorded and will be available on the websites of the Leagues of Women Voters of Deerfield-Lincolnshire, Highland Park-Highwood, Lake Forest-Lake Bluff Area, and Glenview-Glencoe. We hope you will encourage friends and family to go and listen and hear from the candidates directly. And I want to say a very special thank you to our timers. This is not an easy job. And it is really made harder by having to do it on Zoom than in real life, sitting in the same room. So I really appreciate the amount of care and attention that they have had to keep us all on track. I thank each of you candidates again for participating. This is where democracy, the rubber hits the road. And I thank the organizers of this. It has been a pleasure to be your moderator this evening. Voters, please remember to go out and vote, encourage your friends and family to vote, and make sure that you know what's on your ballot, who's on your ballot, make a plan to vote, and make sure it happens. Thank you. Good evening to everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.